The summer heat shimmered over the rolling plains of Wyoming Territory as 12-year-old Tessa Miller watched the lanky boy mount his first real horse, her heart swelling with a pride she was too young to understand. Jackson Cooper sat tall in the saddle, his mop of sandy hair catching the golden light of 1869, a year that would mark both their lives forever. "You're leaving tomorrow," Tessa said, her voice small against the vast emptiness around them. The Cooper family wagon was already half-packed, California gold fever having finally claimed Jackson's father after years of resistance. Jackson nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Pa says there's nothing left for us here." "There's me," Tessa whispered, though not loud enough for him to hear. The two children had grown up side by side on neighboring homesteads, their friendship blossoming amid the harsh realities of frontier life. Now, at the precipice of separation, Tessa felt a desperation she couldn't articulate. "I have something for you," she said suddenly, digging into the pocket of her calico dress. Her fingers closed around the small heart-shaped locket her grandmother had given her before passing a family heirloom that had traveled from England across the Atlantic and all the way to this wild territory. Jackson dismounted, curiosity brightening his features. "What is it?" Tessa held out the locket, its silver surface catching the sunlight. "So you won't forget me." "I could never forget you, Tess," Jackson said, but he took the locket with reverence, his fingers lingering against her palm for just a moment longer than necessary. "Open it," she urged. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of Tessa, taken last Christmas when a traveling photographer had visited the settlement. Beside it, she had placed a lock of her auburn hair, tied with a blue thread. "I can't take this," Jackson protested, recognizing the value of such an item on the frontier. "Your grandmother's locket. You have to," Tessa insisted, closing his fingers around it. "It's a promise. Someday, when we're grown, you'll bring it back to me." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something neither could name but both would carry forward, a seed planted in fertile ground. "I promise," Jackson said solemnly, slipping the locket into his shirt pocket close to his heart. "When I'm a man, I'll find you again, Tessa Miller." The next morning, the Cooper family headed west, their wagon joining the countless others seeking fortune in California's dwindling gold rush. Tessa stood on the porch of her family's modest cabin, watching until the dust settled and the horizon swallowed the last trace of the boy who carried her heart in a silver locket. 15 years slipped by like water through cupped hands. The Wyoming Territory of 1884 was hardly recognizable from the untamed wilderness of Tessa's childhood. The railroad had come, bringing with it towns that sprouted like weeds after rain, and the great cattle drives pushed north from Texas, changing the landscape and economy forever. Tessa stood on the boardwalk outside her millinery shop in the town of Sweetwater, watching cowboys and cattlemen bustle through the dusty main street. At 27, she had built a respectable business for herself after her parents' passing 5 years earlier. Unmarried but comfortable, she had long ago stopped scanning the faces of travelers for the boy with sandy hair. The locket, like the promise it represented, had faded to a childhood memory sweet but insubstantial in the harsh light of adulthood. "Miss Miller," Sheriff Wade tipped his hat as he passed. "Fine day, isn't it?" "Indeed, Sheriff," Tessa replied with a polite smile. "Though I hear there might be trouble coming." The sheriff slowed, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Don't you worry about those rumors, Miss Miller. Just some cowboys passing through with a herd bound for Montana. They'll be gone before you know it." Tessa nodded, though the tension in the older man's shoulders told a different story. Cattle wars were flaring up across the territory, and Sweetwater sat in contested ground between large ranching interests. As the sheriff continued down the street, Tessa's attention was drawn to a rider approaching from the south road. He sat easy in the saddle, the way men did who'd spent more time on horseback than on solid ground. There was something in his posture that tugged at her memory, though she couldn't place it. She returned to her shop, dismissing the thought. After 15 years on the frontier, one learned not to dwell on ghosts. The bell above her door jingled later that afternoon, and Tessa looked up from her work, a wedding bonnet for the banker's daughter, to find a tall figure silhouetted against the bright street outside. "Be with you in a moment," she called, securing a final pin before rising. The man stepped further into the shop, and light fell across features that had matured but remained unmistakable. Sandy hair, now darker and cut short beneath his hat, frames a face weathered by sun and wind. But the eyes, those clear blue eyes, hadn't changed at all. "Hello, Tess," Jackson Cooper said softly. The hat pin in Tessa's hand clattered to the wooden floor. "Jackson," he removed his hat, revealing a small scar above his right eyebrow that hadn't been there before. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here." "I never left," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 1,000 questions crowded her mind, but she couldn't voice a single one. Jackson's gaze moved around the shop, taking in the displays of bonnets and hats, the neat workstation by the window, the life she had built without him. "You've done well for yourself. And you," she managed, finally finding her voice. "Did California yield the gold your father sought?" A shadow crossed his features. "No, Pa died the first winter. Fever took him and my little sister." He paused, the weight of old grief evident in the set of his shoulders. "Ma remarried, but I struck out on my own when I turned 16. Been working cattle drives between Texas and Montana ever since." "I'm sorry about your father," Tessa said. "And little Emma." The mention of his sister's name seemed to surprise him. "You remember her?" "Of course I do. She used to follow us everywhere, collecting wildflowers and trying to catch grasshoppers in her apron." Jackson smiled, and for a moment, Tessa could see the boy she had known. "She would have liked you remembering that." An awkward silence fell between them, 15 years of unshared lives creating a gulf neither knew how to cross. "Are you staying in town long?" Tessa finally asked, moving behind her counter, needing the barrier between them. "That depends," Jackson said, his hand moving to his shirt pocket. Tessa's breath caught as he withdrew a small silver object, tarnished with age and wear. The locket, her grandmother's locket, lay in his palm, the chain coiled around it like a sleeping snake. "You kept it," she whispered, unable to hide her astonishment. "All this time." "I made a promise," Jackson said simply, stepping forward to place the locket on the counter between them. "When I was a man, I'd find you and bring it back." Tessa stared at the locket, not reaching for it. "And now that you have." Their eyes met across the counter, and Jackson's expression softened. "Now I'd like to know if the girl who gave it to me might be willing to let the man I've become stay around long enough to get reacquainted." The bell above the door jingled again before Tessa could respond, and both turned to see Sheriff Wade enter, his expression grim. "Miss Miller," he nodded, then fixed his gaze on Jackson. "You must be one of the newcomers. Cooper, isn't it?" Jackson straightened, wariness replacing the warmth in his eyes. "That's right, Jackson Cooper. Word travels fast in a small town," the sheriff said. "Especially when a man rides in with the Double R outfit. Randall's boys aren't welcome here, Cooper." Tessa looked between the two men, confusion creasing her brow. "Sheriff Jackson grew up here. His family had the homestead next to ours before they left for California." The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so?" "Well, Miss Miller, you should know that your childhood friend now rides for Richard Randall, the same man trying to run half the small ranchers in this county out of business." Jackson's jaw tightened. "I signed on for a cattle drive, Sheriff. I'm not part of any range war." "Tell that to the Burns family. Their place was burned out last month, and tracks led back to the Double R line camp." The sheriff's hand rested meaningfully near his holstered pistol. "I'm giving all of Randall's men the same warning. Stay out of trouble while you're here and move on quickly. We don't want your kind in Sweetwater." With a final nod to Tessa, the sheriff departed, leaving a tense silence in his wake. "Is it true?" Tessa asked quietly. "What he said about the Burns place?" Jackson's expression hardened. "I told you I signed on 3 weeks ago in Denver. I don't know anything about what happened before that." He replaced his hat. "I should go." "Wait," Tessa said, reaching for the locket but not picking it up. "You can't just leave, not again. Seems like I've ridden into something complicated here, Tess." His use of her childhood nickname softened the edge in his voice. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door. You still haven't told me why you came back now, after all these years." Jackson hesitated, then reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. He unfolded it carefully and placed it beside the locket. It was a small announcement from a Denver paper, dated 2 years earlier. Miller Millinery opens in Sweetwater, Wyoming Territory. Proprietress Miss Tessa Miller brings Eastern fashions to the frontier. "I've been carrying this almost as long as the locket," Jackson admitted. "When I saw the double R was driving cattle north through Wyoming, I signed on immediately." Tessa felt a warmth spread through her chest. "You came looking for me." "I've been looking for you for 15 years, Tess. Just took me this long to find a trail." The intensity in his gaze made her heart race in a way she hadn't felt since she was a girl watching him ride away. "Come to supper," she said impulsively. "Tonight, my place is just behind the shop. We have a lot to catch up on." Jackson glanced toward the door, clearly thinking of the sheriff's warning. "Are you sure that's wise? Since when has wisdom had anything to do with you and me, Jackson Cooper?" Tessa smiled, finally picking up the locket and closing her fingers around its familiar shape. 7 o'clock. "Don't be late." After Jackson left, Tessa found it impossible to concentrate on her work. The half-finished wedding bonnet lay neglected as she paced her small shop, the locket clutched in her palm. He had kept it all these years. Carried it across mountains and deserts, through whatever adventures and hardships had carved those lines around his eyes and left that scar on his forehead. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. At closing time, Tessa hurried to her small cottage behind the shop. She changed into her best everyday dress, a blue calico that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes, and set about preparing a simple but hearty meal. Her cooking skills were adequate if not remarkable, but she took extra care with the venison stew and fresh bread. As she worked, memories surfaced like bubbles in a stream. Jackson teaching her to fish in the creek that ran between their properties, the two of them building a fort in the old cottonwood tree. His expression the day she gave him the locket solemn yet tender, already showing glimpses of the man he would become. The knock at her door came precisely at 7, and Tessa smoothed her apron nervously before answering. Jackson stood on her small porch, hat in hand. He had cleaned up, his hair still damp from washing, and changed into a fresh shirt. In his other hand, he held a small bunch of prairie wildflowers. "These aren't much," he said, offering them with an almost boyish uncertainty. "But I remembered how you used to press flowers in your mother's Bible." Tessa accepted them, touched that he remembered such a detail. "They're beautiful. Come in." Jackson ducked through the doorway, his tall frame making her cottage seem smaller than it was. He glanced around the neat, modest space with appreciation. "It suits you," he said. "Orderly but comfortable." "Thank you," Tessa replied, placing the flowers in a small jar of water. "Please sit down, the stew is ready." Over supper, they carefully navigated the years between them. Jackson spoke of California's disappointments, the ranch work he found in Arizona Territory, the cattle drives that took him through Colorado, Texas, Kansas, and Nebraska. He mentioned a brief stint prospecting in the mountains and 2 years working for the railroad. Tessa shared the loss of her parents to influenza, her apprenticeship with a milliner in Cheyenne, and her determination to open her own shop, despite the obstacles faced by a woman in business. She glossed over the proposals she had declined 3 in total, from respectable men who offered security but stirred nothing in her heart. Neither mentioned the locket until the meal was finished, and they sat with coffee by the small fireplace that warded off the evening chill. "May I ask why you never married?" Jackson finally ventured, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Tessa considered her answer carefully. "I suppose I never found a compelling reason to change my situation. My business provides for my needs and I value my independence." She hesitated, then added softly, "And perhaps a part of me was waiting for something or someone I'd lost." Jackson's gaze intensified. "And now I'm wondering why the boy who promised to return has come back as a man who rides for Richard Randall." She set her coffee cup down. "The Randall outfit has been buying or burning out small ranchers all over the county, Jackson. People I know, people who have helped me since my parents died." Jackson leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Tess, I swear to you, I knew nothing about Randall's reputation when I signed on." I was in Denver, heard they needed men for a drive north through Wyoming, and saw my chance to find you." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I've been with them less than a month. First I've heard of any trouble was from your sheriff today." "He's not my sheriff," Tessa corrected. "And I believe you, but it doesn't change the fact that you're riding with men who have done terrible things." "I'll quit," Jackson said without hesitation. "Tomorrow morning I'll collect my wages and walk away." Tessa studied him, noting the sincerity in his expression. "And then what? Then?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew the locket, which Tessa had returned to him after supper. "Then I fulfill the second part of my promise, which was to find out if the woman you became might have room in her life for the man I turned into." He opened the locket, revealing the faded daguerreotype and the auburn lock of hair, still tied with blue thread. 15 years, Tess, and not a day went by that I didn't think of you." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. "Why didn't you write? Even once." "I tried. Twice." "Letters came back unclaimed." He closed the locket gently. "After the second one, I figured you'd moved on, maybe married. It wasn't until I saw that newspaper clipping that I dared hope again." The revelation that he had tried to reach her sent a pang through Tessa's heart. "How different might their lives have been if those letters had found her?" "I would have answered," she whispered. "If I'd known you were looking for me." Jackson set the locket on the small table between them. "I'm here now, looking right at you, and I'm asking if there's a chance for us, Tess. Not as the children we were, but as the people we've become." Before Tessa could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Jackson was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger. "Trouble in town," he muttered, peering through the curtain. "Looks like some of the Double R boys are raising hell at the saloon." More shots rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass and female screams. "Stay here," Jackson ordered, reaching for his hat and gun belt. "Where are you going?" Tessa demanded, alarm rising in her throat, "to try and stop this before someone gets killed." His expression was grim as he buckled his gun belt. "Those are my riding partners out there, drunk and looking for a fight. The sheriff won't be able to handle this alone." Jackson paused at the door, his eyes softening as they met hers. "I'll be back, Tess. That's a promise." Before she could protest further, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Tessa stood frozen for a moment, then rushed to the window. Through the darkness, she could see the main street illuminated by lanterns and the glow from the saloon. Figures moved in and out of the light, men running, some with guns drawn. She couldn't stay here, waiting and wondering. Not again. Grabbing her shawl, Tessa hurried out into the night, following the sounds of chaos toward the center of town. The scene that greeted her was one of barely contained violence. 4 cowboys wearing the Double R brand stood in a loose semicircle in front of the saloon, facing down Sheriff Wade and 2 deputies. One of the cowboys was bleeding from a cut above his eye, while another swayed drunkenly, still clutching a bottle of whiskey. "This ain't your town, Wade." The largest cowboy shouted, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "Randall's gonna own this whole valley come spring. Not while I'm sheriff," Wade replied steadily, though Tessa could see the tension in his stance. The odds weren't in his favor, and everyone knew it. Just as the situation seemed ready to explode into violence, Jackson stepped between the 2 groups, his back to the sheriff as he faced his fellow cowboys. "That's enough, Briggs," he said to the large man. "You've had your fun, time to head back to camp." "Well, look who it is," Briggs sneered. "Cooper, playing peacemaker. Heard you were sniffing around some local skirt, that turning you soft already." Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks as she realized they were talking about her. She pressed deeper into the shadows of the mercantile doorway, watching anxiously. "I'm trying to keep you from getting ventilated by the law," Jackson replied evenly. 4 against 3 aren't odds worth dying over, especially when you're too drunk to shoot straight. "Who says we're dying tonight?" Briggs took a menacing step forward. "Maybe it's the sheriff and his boys who need to worry." Jackson didn't budge. "Randall didn't send us here to start a war, Briggs. He sent us to move cattle. You really want to explain to him why one of his best men got killed over a saloon brawl?" For a tense moment, it seemed Briggs might ignore the logic. Then, with a contemptuous spit, he lowered his hand from his gun. always were a smooth talker, Cooper. He gestured to the other cowboys. Come on, boys, let's leave these fine citizens to their quiet little town. For now. As the cowboys began to move off, Briggs jabbed a finger into Jackson's chest. You coming back to camp, or has your old girlfriend got you collared already? I'll be along, Jackson said coolly. Someone needs to make sure you actually leave town instead of circling back to cause more trouble. Briggs laughed, an ugly sound in the night air. Have it your way. But Randall won't like hearing one of his men is getting friendly with the locals, especially not in a town that's giving us so much grief. As the cowboys mounted up and rode out, Sheriff Wade approached Jackson, his expression guarded. That was either very brave or very foolish, Cooper. Jackson turned to face him. Just trying to prevent bloodshed, Sheriff. By standing with them or against them, I'm not sure which side you're on. Tonight, I was on the side of not seeing good men die needlessly. Jackson's tone hardened slightly. But come morning, I won't be riding with the double R anymore. The sheriff studied him for a long moment. Because of Miss Miller. Because I don't work for men who burn out families, Jackson replied. But yes, also because of Miss Miller. Wade nodded slowly. Fair enough, but a word of warning, Randall doesn't take kindly to men who quit his outfit, especially not men who know his business. I can handle myself. I hope so. The sheriff glanced toward the shadows where Tessa stood, surprising her with his awareness of her presence. For both your sakes. As the sheriff moved off to clear the remaining onlookers from the street, Jackson turned and walked directly toward Tessa's hiding place. I told you to stay at the house, he said quietly, reaching her side. You should know by now I don't take orders well, Tessa replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear still coursing through her. Are you really quitting the double R tomorrow? First light, he confirmed. Though after tonight, it might be more complicated than just collecting my wages and walking away. Tessa bit her lip. That man, Briggs, he seemed dangerous. He is. Jackson's honesty was unflinching, which is why you need to be careful, Tess. Once I quit, and especially if word gets around about us, Randall might see you as a way to get to me. Is there an us, Jackson? Tessa asked, suddenly needing clarity amid the chaos of the evening. In answer, Jackson gently took her face between his hands and kissed her a tender, questioning kiss that spoke of 15 years of longing and the fragile hope of redemption. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers in the dim light. There's always been an us, Tess, he whispered. Even when mountains and deserts and years stood between us. Tessa's heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. She had waited so long for this moment, yet it came wrapped in danger and uncertainty. Come back to the house, she said softly. It's not safe out here. They walked back to her cottage in silence, both aware that the evening's events had changed everything. Inside, the remnants of their interrupted supper still sat on the table, a reminder of simpler moments just hours before. Jackson moved to the window, peering out at the now quiet street. I should go, if Briggs comes looking for me and finds me here. He won't, Tessa said with more confidence than she felt. Not tonight, and tomorrow you'll quit the double R. And then what? Jackson turned to face her, his expression troubled. Randall has a long reach, Tess. I can't stay here and put you in danger. So you'll leave again. The words came out sharper than she intended, old pain surfacing unexpectedly. No, Jackson crossed the room to stand before her. Not without you, not this time. The implications of his statement hung in the air between them. What are you saying, Jackson? I'm saying that once I quit Randall's outfit, we should leave Sweetwater together. He took her hands in his. I've saved enough to buy a small spread in Montana Territory. Good water, good grass. We could build something there away from Randall's influence. You're asking me to abandon my business, my home, everything I've built here. Tessa pulled her hands away, conflicted. Jackson, you've been back in my life for less than a day. But I've been in your heart for 15 years, he countered gently, just as you've been in mine. Tessa couldn't deny the truth of his words, but the speed at which her carefully constructed life was unraveling left her dizzy. I need time to think. Jackson nodded, respecting her hesitation. Of course, but time is something we may not have much of once I quit the double R tomorrow. He moved to retrieve his hat, pausing to pick up the locket from where it still lay on the small table. Keep this tonight, he said, pressing it into her palm. Let it remind you of the promise I kept and the one I'm making now." As his fingers brushed hers, Tessa felt the same electric connection that had stirred between them as children, now deepened and matured by the years. "What promise is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That whatever comes next, we face it together." Jackson's blue eyes held hers with unwavering certainty. "I lost you once, Tessa Miller. I won't lose you again." With those words hanging in the air, he bent to kiss her once more, a gentle promise sealed in the quiet of her cottage before slipping out into the night. Alone, Tessa clutched the locket to her chest, feeling as though she stood at a crossroads that would determine the entire course of her future. The practical, independent woman she had become urged caution, while the heart that had waited 15 years for Jackson Cooper's return pulled her toward a leap of faith. She opened the locket, studying the faded image of her younger self and the lock of hair that had traveled so far. Whatever she decided, she knew with absolute certainty that by giving Jackson this token all those years ago, she had set in motion a journey that was far from over. Morning came with the soft golden light Wyoming was famous for, streaming through Tessa's bedroom window after a night of fitful sleep and racing thoughts. She rose and dressed methodically, trying to impose order on her tumultuous emotions. The locket lay on her bedside table, a silent reminder of all that had happened and all that might yet be. By the time she opened her shop at 8 o'clock, Tessa had reached no firm decision about Jackson's proposal. How could she possibly choose between the security of the life she had built and the love she had never truly forgotten? The bell above her door jingled mid-morning, and Tessa looked up expecting to see Jackson. Instead, Sheriff Wade entered, his expression grave. "Miss Miller," he greeted her, hat in hand. "I need to speak with you about Jackson Cooper." Tessa's heart lurched. "Has something happened?" "There was trouble at the Double R camp this morning," the sheriff said carefully. "Cooper went to quit the outfit as he said he would." Words were exchanged and then fists. "Is he hurt?" Tessa moved from behind the counter, fear evident in her voice. "Bruised but standing," Wade assured her. "But that's not why I'm here. After the fight, Cooper rode into town and straight to the bank. Drew out a considerable sum from what my deputy observed." "I don't understand. Why are you telling me this?" The sheriff's weathered face showed genuine concern. "Because he then rode north out of town, Miss Miller, alone, without coming to see you." Tessa felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. There must be some mistake. He wouldn't leave without saying goodbye, Wade finished gently. "I'm sorry, but my deputy saw him clear as day, heading north at a gallop, saddlebags full." Disbelief warred with a creeping sense of betrayal in Tessa's chest. After all his promises, after returning the locket and speaking of a future together, could Jackson have simply ridden away again? "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff," she managed, struggling to maintain her composure. Wade studied her sympathetically. "I know you had history with Cooper, Miss Miller, but men change. 15 years is a long time." After the sheriff left, Tessa closed her shop early, unable to focus on work with her mind in such turmoil. She returned to her cottage, half expecting, hoping to find Jackson waiting for her with an explanation. The house was empty. The locket seemed to mock her from the bedside table. Twice now, she had allowed herself to believe in Jackson Cooper, and twice he had ridden away. The pain was sharper this time, edged with the bitter knowledge that she should have known better. As evening fell, Tessa sat by her window, watching the road north as twilight deepened into night. No rider appeared on the horizon. A knock at her door startled her from her vigil. Hope flared briefly, only to be doused when she opened the door to find not Jackson but a young boy from town. "Miss Miller," the boy said breathlessly, "Mr. Peterson at the livery stable told me to fetch you right away. Said it's about Mr. Cooper." "What about him?" Tessa demanded, grabbing her shawl. "Don't know, madam. Just said to hurry." Tessa followed the boy through the darkening streets to the livery stable at the edge of town. Peterson, the livery owner, met her at the door, his normally cheerful face solemn. "Miss Miller, thank you for coming so quickly," he said, leading her inside. "What's this about, Mr. Peterson? The sheriff told me Jackson rode out of town this morning." "He did," Peterson confirmed, guiding her toward the back of the stable. "But his horse returned alone about an hour ago." lathered and wild-eyed. They reached a stall where Jackson's bay gelding stood, still breathing heavily despite Peterson's evident care. The horse's flank bore a dark stain that Tessa realized with horror was blood. "Is that not the horse's blood?" Peterson said grimly. "And there's this." He handed her a piece of paper, crumpled and spotted with dirt. It was stuffed in his saddlebag. Tessa unfolded it with trembling fingers. The message, written in a crude hand, was brief and chilling. "Cooper talked too much. Come to Broken Ridge alone if you want what's left of him. Bring the deed to your shop. RR." The initials left no doubt Richard Randall had taken Jackson. "Have you shown this to the sheriff?" Tessa asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear churning inside her. Peterson shook his head. "Thought you should see it first. Cooper spoke of you last night when he stabled his horse. Said if anything happened to him, I should tell you. Thank you." Tessa folded the note carefully. "Please don't mention this to anyone else yet, not even the sheriff." "Miss Miller," Peterson protested, "this is clearly a serious matter. Cooper could be badly hurt or worse." "I know," Tessa said, her mind racing ahead. "But if the sheriff rides out with a posse, Randall might kill Jackson before they arrive." She couldn't bring herself to speak aloud, the images flooding her mind. Jackson wounded, suffering, perhaps dying while waiting for help. "What will you do?" Peterson asked, concern evident in his voice. Tessa straightened her shoulders, decision crystallizing in an instant. "What I must." She returned to her cottage and changed into her sturdiest riding clothes, the split skirt and jacket she used for the occasional journey to neighboring towns. From a locked chest, she retrieved a small Derringer pistol that had belonged to her father, checking that it was loaded before tucking it into her pocket. The deed to her shop and cottage lay in the same chest, and she took it as well, though with no intention of actually surrendering it. At the livery stable, Peterson helped her saddle her mare, his expression troubled. "Broken Ridge is almost 10 miles north, Miss Miller. You can't go out there alone at night." "I don't have a choice," Tessa replied, mounting with practiced ease. "And I need your word that you won't tell anyone where I've gone until morning." "That's asking a lot," Peterson protested. "A man's life depends on it, a man I've known since childhood." Tessa's gaze was unwavering. "Please, Mr. Peterson." After a moment's hesitation, the livery owner nodded reluctantly. "Until morning then, but if you're not back by daybreak, I'm going straight to Sheriff Wade." "Fair enough," Tessa agreed, gathering her reins. "Thank you." The night was clear, with a half-moon providing just enough light to follow the north road. Tessa rode at a steady pace, mindful of the need to keep her horse fresh for the return journey. Her mind raced ahead, trying to formulate a plan beyond simply arriving at Broken Ridge. The fact that Jackson had been taken suggested he hadn't abandoned her after all. Perhaps he had been riding north on some errand related to their planned departure, only to be intercepted by Randall's men. The thought brought both relief and renewed fear. Broken Ridge came into view after nearly 2 hours of riding a jagged outcropping of rock that jutted from the rolling plains like the spine of some ancient beast. As Tessa approached, she could make out the glow of a campfire at its base. She slowed her mare to a walk, every sense alert. 3 figures moved around the fire, and a 4th lay motionless on the ground nearby. Even from a distance, Tessa recognized Jackson's broad shoulders and the sandy hair reflecting the firelight. Drawing her mare to a halt behind a stand of scrub pine, Tessa assessed the situation. She could make out Briggs among the men at the fire, his bullish form unmistakable. The other 2 were strangers to her, though they clearly wore the double R brand on their vests. Of Randall himself, there was no sign. Tessa dismounted quietly, securing her mare to a pine branch. The Derringer felt impossibly small in her pocket as she considered her options. 3 armed men against 1 woman with a 2-shot pistol were odds no gambler would take. But then, she wasn't here to fight. She was here to negotiate and to discover whether Jackson still lived. Taking a deep breath, Tessa stepped out from the shelter of the pines and called out, "I'm here, as requested." The reaction was immediate. All 3 men sprang to their feet, guns drawn and aimed in her direction. "Hold your fire," Briggs ordered as recognition dawned. "It's the milliner." He lowered his weapon slightly and stepped forward. "Miss Miller, you came alone as instructed?" Yes, Tessa replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. I have what you asked for, now I want to see Jackson Cooper. Briggs gestured toward the still form by the fire. He's right there. Not much for conversation at the moment, but still breathing. I want to examine him myself, Tessa insisted. After a moment's consideration, Briggs nodded. Come ahead, slowly, and keep your hands where I can see them. Tessa approached the camp with measured steps, fighting the urge to run to Jackson's side. As she drew closer, she could see that his face was bruised and bloodied, one eye swollen shut. His hands were bound behind him, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. What have you done to him? She demanded, kneeling beside him. Just persuaded him that quitting the double R wasn't in his best interest, Briggs replied coldly. He disagreed rather strenuously. Tessa gently touched Jackson's face, and his uninjured eye fluttered open. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by alarm. Tess. He whispered hoarsely. No, you shouldn't be here. SHH, she soothed, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. It's going to be all right. Jackson struggled weakly against his bonds. They'll kill us both, you have to go. Touching reunion, Briggs interrupted sarcastically. Now, Miss Miller, the deed. Tessa rose to face him, positioning herself between the gunman and Jackson. First, tell me why my shop, why involve me at all? Briggs laughed. Your shop sits on the only water access in the commercial part of town. Randall wants to control that water. As for involving you, he gestured to Jackson. Cooper here made it clear you meant something to him, made it easy to ensure his cooperation and yours. Where is Randall? Tessa asked, stalling as she tried to formulate a plan. I expected to deal with him directly. The boss doesn't dirty his hands with the details, one of the other cowboys answered. That's what he pays us for. Tessa withdrew the deed from her pocket, holding it up but not extending it. And if I give you this, what guarantee do I have that you'll let us both go? The word of a Randall man, Briggs said with a cold smile that did nothing to reassure her. Not good enough. Tessa took a calculated risk. I left a letter with Mr. Peterson at the livery. If we're not back by morning, it goes to the sheriff, detailing everything including the location of this meeting. It was a bluff, but Briggs couldn't know that. His expression darkened with uncertainty. You're in no position to negotiate, woman. Neither are you, Tessa countered. Kill us, and you'll have the law from 3 counties hunting you down. Randall won't protect you, then he'll deny ever giving such orders. A tense silence followed as Briggs weighed her words. Tessa could feel Jackson's gaze on her, silently pleading with her to save herself. Finally, Briggs spat on the ground. Fine, give me the deed and you can take what's left of your boyfriend. Untie him first, Tessa demanded. After a moment's hesitation, Briggs nodded to one of his men, who moved to cut Jackson's bonds. As soon as his hands were free, Jackson struggled to sit up, grimacing with pain. The deed, Briggs repeated, hand outstretched. Tessa passed him the document, and he examined it briefly in the firelight before tucking it into his vest. Pleasure doing business with you, Miss Miller. Now take Cooper and get out of here. And remember, accidents happen on the frontier all the time, especially to people who talk too much. The threat hung in the air as Tessa helped Jackson to his feet. He leaned heavily against her, barely able to stand. My horse, he muttered. Gone, Briggs informed him with malicious satisfaction. Returned to town without you. Convenient for sending our invitation to the lady, though. Tessa guided Jackson toward the pines where her mare waited, acutely aware of the 3 pairs of eyes following their slow progress. Each step seemed to take an eternity, each moment pregnant with the possibility that Briggs would change his mind and decide to eliminate witnesses after all. When they reached the mare, Jackson leaned against a tree trunk, breathing heavily. You shouldn't have come, Tess. Too dangerous. And leave you to die, Tessa helped him mount, noting with concern how he winced at every movement. Not a chance, Jackson Cooper. She swung up behind him, reaching around his battered body to take the reins. As they started back toward town at a slow walk, she could feel him trembling with exhaustion and pain. I didn't run out on you, he murmured as they put distance between themselves and the campfire. Need you to know that. I know, Tessa assured him, tightening her arm around his waist to steady him. Save your strength. We've got a long ride ahead. They traveled in silence for a time, the only sounds the steady plod of the mare's hooves and Jackson's labored breathing. After about a mile, he spoke again, his voice slightly stronger. They jumped me on the road. I'd ridden out to check on a parcel of land north of town, thought maybe we could settle there instead of going all the way to Montana. The revelation sent a wave of warmth through Tessa's heart, tempering her fear for their situation. A parcel of land, she murmured against his shoulder. Were you planning to ask my opinion on it? Despite his injuries, a hint of Jackson's familiar humor surfaced. Was going to surprise you, romantic gesture and all that. Getting kidnapped and beaten isn't exactly romantic, Jackson. No, he agreed soberly. But you coming to rescue me, that I won't soon forget. They rode on through the night, Jackson occasionally drifting into semi-consciousness before rallying again. By the time the lights of Sweetwater appeared on the horizon, dawn was breaking, painting the eastern sky in delicate shades of pink and gold. Peterson was waiting anxiously at the livery stable, relief flooding his features as he saw them approach. Miss Miller, Mr. Cooper, thank the Lord you're both alive. He hurried to help Jackson dismount, alarmed at the cowboy's condition. We need to get the doctor. And the sheriff, Tessa added, sliding from the saddle. Briggs and his men are at Broken Ridge, but they won't stay there long once they realize I've returned. While Peterson sent a stable boy running for both the doctor and Sheriff Wade, Tessa helped Jackson to a bench inside the stable. In the growing light, his injuries looked even worse, a testament to the savage beating he had endured. The deed, he said suddenly, looking up at her with his one good eye. You gave them the deed to your shop, your home. Tessa smiled, reaching into her pocket to withdraw a folded paper. I gave them a deed, just not the real one. Jackson stared at her in astonishment, then let out a pained laugh. You clever woman, what did you give them? A copy I had made last year for insurance purposes, Tessa explained. It looks authentic enough to fool Briggs, but it won't stand up to legal scrutiny. Her expression sobered. Still, that only buys us time. Once Randall discovers the deception, we'll be long gone by then, Jackson finished, taking her hand in his bloodied one. If you'll still have me, that is. Before Tessa could respond, the stable doors burst open to admit Dr. Matthews and Sheriff Wade, the latter's expression shifting from concern to grim satisfaction as he took in Jackson's condition. Looks like I was wrong about you riding out, Cooper, the sheriff acknowledged. Peterson filled me in on the way over. You up to telling me exactly what happened? While the doctor examined Jackson's injuries, Tessa and Jackson related the events of the past 24 hours. The sheriff's face darkened with anger as the full extent of Randall's actions became clear. I've been trying to pin something on that snake for months, Wade said when they finished. This might finally be enough to bring him down. He turned to Tessa. Though that fake deed complicates matters. Legally speaking, you attempted to defraud them. To save a man's life, Tessa pointed out. After they attempted murder, the sheriff nodded concedingly. True enough. Still, until Randall is behind bars, you two are in danger. He looked between them thoughtfully. Might be best if you left town for a spell. Already planning on it, Jackson said, wincing as the doctor probed a particularly tender rib. As soon as I'm able to travel. Dr. Matthews closed his medical bag with a definitive snap, which won't be for at least a week, young man. 3 broken ribs, possible internal bruising, and that eye needs careful monitoring. He turned to Tessa. He'll need rest and careful nursing. Can I entrust him to your care, Miss Miller? Tessa nodded without hesitation. Of course, doctor. The sheriff tipped his hat. I'll leave a deputy near your place until Cooper's well enough to travel. Meanwhile, I'll round up a posse and head out to Broken Ridge, though I doubt we'll find more than cold ashes. After the sheriff departed, Peterson helped Tessa get Jackson into a wagon for the short journey to her cottage. Despite his injuries, Jackson remained conscious, his good eye never leaving Tessa's face. You risked everything for me, he said quietly as Peterson drove them through the awakening town. Your business, your home, your life. Tessa squeezed his hand gently. Some things are worth the risk, Jackson Cooper. Marry me, Tess, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out with urgent sincerity. Not someday, not when we're settled somewhere else. Now, today. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. Jackson, you're injured and exhausted. This isn't the time, it's exactly the time, he interrupted, struggling to sit up straighter despite the pain. I've lost 15 years already. I don't want to waste another day without you as my wife. The wagon pulled up in front of her cottage, and Peterson discreetly busied himself with the horses, giving them a moment of privacy. Tessa studied Jackson's battered face, seeing beyond the injuries to the boy who had carried her locket across half the continent, and the man who had returned to fulfill his promise. In his eyes, or rather, in the one not swollen shut, she saw a future that suddenly seemed not just possible but inevitable. Yes, she whispered, her heart expanding with a joy that transcended their dangerous circumstances. Yes, I'll marry you, today, tomorrow, whenever you want. Jackson's smile, despite split lips and bruised cheeks, was radiant. Today, he insisted. I'll send for the preacher as soon as we get inside. Peterson helped them into the cottage, settling Jackson on Tessa's small sofa before departing with a promise to return later with supplies. Alone at last, Tessa knelt beside the sofa, carefully brushing Jackson's hair back from his forehead. You're impossible, she told him fondly. A normal man would be thinking about recovery, not wedding plans. I've never claimed to be normal, Jackson replied, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. And nearly dying has a way of clarifying one's priorities. Despite her attempts to persuade him to rest, Jackson insisted on sending a message to Reverend Simmons. By noon, the elderly preacher arrived, eyebrows rising at the sight of the battered groom-to-be but offering no judgment. Love waits for no man, he said simply. Not even for healing. With Sheriff Wade's deputy standing witness from the porch, maintaining his guard duty while affording them privacy, and Peterson's wife hastily recruited as a second witness, Jackson and Tessa exchanged vows in the small front room of her cottage. The ceremony was brief but deeply meaningful, the traditional words taking on profound significance given all they had endured to reach this moment. When Reverend Simmons pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson reached into his pocket and withdrew the silver locket. With hands still trembling from weakness, he fastened it around Tessa's neck. Full circle, he murmured, his fingers lingering against her skin. From the girl who gave it to the boy to the woman who receives it from the man. Tessa touched the locket, feeling its familiar weight against her collarbone. It's been on quite a journey. As have we, Jackson agreed, drawing her close for a careful, tender kiss that sealed their union. The next week passed in a blur of adjustment and planning. Jackson recovered slowly under Tessa's careful nursing, while she made arrangements to sell her business to her assistant, a capable young woman who had learned the millinery trade quickly. Sheriff Wade returned from his expedition to Broken Ridge with news that surprised no one. Briggs and his companions had vanished, along with any evidence of their campsite. More troubling was the report that Richard Randall himself had been seen in Denver, possibly fleeing jurisdiction before charges could be brought. He'll be back, Wade warned during a visit to check on their plans. Men like Randall don't abandon their ambitions easily. You two are wise to make a fresh start elsewhere. By the time Jackson was strong enough to travel, Tessa had sold her shop and most of her possessions, keeping only those items with sentimental value and practical use for their new life. The parcel of land Jackson had been investigating proved to be available, and with their combined savings, they purchased its site unseen 160 acres with good water and grazing, far enough from Sweetwater to be safe, but close enough to civilization for comfort. On their final evening in the cottage, Tessa sat beside Jackson on the small sofa, her head resting against his shoulder as they watched the fire burn down to embers. His arm around her waist tightened slightly, pulling her closer. Having second thoughts, he asked, sensing her pensive mood. Tessa shook her head. No, just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns. A month ago, I was a respectable businesswoman with a predictable future. Now I'm a married woman about to become a rancher's wife. Regrets. She turned to look up at him, her expression softening. Not a single one. Though I'll miss certain comforts of town life, Jackson chuckled, the sound much easier now that his ribs were healing. Like not having to haul water from a well or cook on a wood stove. I've done both before, Tessa reminded him. I wasn't born a shopkeeper. No, Jackson agreed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You were born to be extraordinary Tessa Cooper, and you've lived up to that destiny admirably. The use of her new surname still sent a thrill through her. As have you, Mr. Cooper. Not many men could survive what you did and emerge with their sense of humor intact. Humor is essential when your face looks like it was used as a horse's stomping ground, Jackson replied wryly, touching his still healing eye. The swelling had subsided, but the bruising remained vivid. Tessa reached up to trace the scar above his eyebrow, the one he'd had when he first returned. You never told me how you got this. Bar fight in Abilene, Jackson admitted. Not my proudest moment, but in my defense, the other fellow started it. And this. She touched a thin, white line along his forearm. Barbed wire. Nasty invention that, useful but dangerous. Tessa continued her gentle exploration, discovering other marks of the life he'd lived during their years, apart a burned scar on his palm from a branding iron, a small, puckered circle on his shoulder that could only be a bullet wound. You've led a difficult life, she observed softly. Jackson caught her hand and brought it to his lips. Parts of it. But nothing worthwhile comes easy, Tess, especially not finding your way back to the one person who makes you feel complete. The earnestness in his voice brought tears to her eyes. When did you become so poetic, Jackson Cooper? Somewhere between Texas and Wyoming, he replied with a smile. A man has a lot of time to think under the stars with only his horse and a herd of cattle for company. And what did you think about? You, he said simply. Always you. The wagon was loaded and ready by dawn the next morning. Tessa took one last look around the empty cottage that had been her home for 5 years, feeling a momentary pang of loss that was quickly overshadowed by anticipation for what lay ahead. On the porch, she paused to touch the doorframe, a silent farewell to the life she was leaving behind. Jackson waited by the wagon, his strength mostly returned, though he still moved carefully to protect his healing ribs. Ready? He asked as she approached. Tessa nodded, accepting his hand to climb onto the wagon seat. Ready. As they drove through the quiet streets of Sweetwater, a few early risers called out farewells. Peterson waved from the livery stable, and Sheriff Wade tipped his hat as they passed the jailhouse. By the time the sun had fully cleared the horizon, the town was behind them, and the open prairie stretched ahead. Their new home lay 3 days' journey north, a journey they took slowly, mindful of Jackson's recovering condition and the heavily laden wagon. They camped under the stars, rekindling the easy companionship of their childhood while discovering the deeper connection of their adult relationship. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they crested a gentle rise and saw before them a small valley cradled between low hills. A creek wound through it like a silver ribbon, its banks lined with cottonwoods whose leaves shimmered gold in the autumn light. Near the water stood the remains of a small cabin, its roof partially collapsed, but its stone foundation solid. There it is, Jackson said softly, drawing the wagon to a halt. Our new beginning. Tessa took in the scene, seeing beyond the dilapidated cabin to the potential that lay in the rich soil and abundant water. It's beautiful, Jackson. We'll rebuild the cabin before winter sets in, he said, his arm around her waist as they surveyed their domain. Next spring, we'll put in crops and start building a herd. One step at a time, Tessa reminded him, practical as always. Jackson turned to her, his eyes reflecting the same blue as the vast Wyoming sky above them. As long as we're taking those steps together, Mrs. Cooper, we can accomplish anything. As if to seal this promise, he reached out to touch the silver locket that now permanently resided around her neck. The small heart-shaped pendant gleamed in the autumn sunlight, a tangible symbol of a journey that had begun with 2 children and a promise, traversed 15 years and countless miles, and finally brought them home, not to a place, but to each other. Together, Tessa agreed, covering his hand with hers, the locket warm between their palms. Always. The winter of 1884-1885 tested their resolve and resourcefulness. With Jackson's experience and Tessa's practical nature, they managed to rebuild the cabin before the first heavy snows, creating a snug if modest home. They purchased a small herd of cattle and 2 additional horses, establishing the beginnings of what they hoped would become a prosperous ranch. News occasionally reached them from Sweetwater. Richard Randall had indeed fled to Denver, but returned in the spring to find his influence diminished. Several small ranchers had banded together under Sheriff Wade's protection, forming an association that successfully resisted Randall's attempts at intimidation. By their first anniversary, Tessa and Jackson had transformed the run-down homestead into a functioning ranch. The cabin had been expanded to include a proper bedroom and larger kitchen, and the barn housed not only their livestock, but a workshop where Jackson crafted furniture during the long winter evenings. On the anniversary of the day Tessa had given Jackson the locket, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. Tessa's head rested against Jackson's shoulder, her hand absently touching the silver locket that had become a talisman of their enduring bond. 15 years to find each other again, she mused, and now we have the rest of our lives together. Jackson's arm tightened around her waist, his hand coming to rest protectively over her slightly rounded belly, evidence of the child that would join their family in the spring. "The best is yet to come, Tess," he promised, his voice rich with contentment and anticipation. "The very best is yet to come." And as they sat together watching darkness settle over the land they had claimed as their own, the silver locket caught the last ray of sunlight, flashing like a star, a small, bright promise kept against all odds, guiding them home to each other at last.